The fluorescent lights of the Chengdu high-tech zone office hummed, a relentless, sterile sound that seemed to amplify the frantic clatter of keyboards. Lin Wei stared at the lines of code blurring on his monitor, the Python script mocking him with its complexity. Outside the expansive windows, the afternoon sun glinted off towering glass facades, symbols of progress and ambition he felt utterly disconnected from. His own reflection, pale and strained, stared back from the dark screen. He pushed his perpetually sliding glasses back up his nose, a nervous habit he couldn't shake. A burst of easy laughter erupted from a nearby cluster of desks. Jiang Hao, of course. Lin Wei's gaze flickered towards the sound. Jiang Hao leaned back in his chair, effortlessly charming a couple of colleagues while simultaneously gesturing towards his own monitor, presumably showcasing some elegant solution or recent triumph. He looked relaxed, confident, the kind of person success seemed to naturally gravitate towards. A familiar sourness coiled in Lin Wei's stomach. Why does it always look so easy for him? He glanced down at his own slightly rumpled shirt, the frayed edge of his cuff. He felt like a poorly rendered sketch next to Jiang Hao's polished photograph. He forced his attention back to the code, the deadline for the initial module looming like a physical weight. He'd been stuck on this particular function for hours, his mind caught in a loop of self-doubt and anticipated criticism. What if it's inefficient? What if Liu Wan thinks it's amateurish? Jiang Hao probably finished his part days ago. The internal monologue was a relentless critic, whispering insecurities that paralyzed him. The ping of an internal message notification startled him. It was from Liu Juan, their team supervisor. "Lin Wei, please see me in my office when you have a moment." His heart gave a painful lurch. This was it. She'd noticed he was lagging. She was going to reprimand him, maybe take him off the project. He imagined the conversation, her polite but firm disappointment, the way her eyes would narrow slightly behind her stylish frames. He pushed his glasses up again, his palms suddenly damp. He took a deep breath, the stale office air doing little to calm him. He stood up, his legs feeling strangely stiff, and made his way towards Liu Wan's glass-walled office at the end of the row, each step echoing the frantic rhythm of his pulse. The short walk felt like traversing a minefield of judging eyes, though logically he knew most people were absorbed in their own work. Liu Wan looked up as he hesitated at the doorway, offering a brief, neutral smile. "Ah, Lin Wei, come in, sit down." He perched awkwardly on the edge of the chair opposite her desk, clutching his hands together in his lap. Her office was minimalist and organized, a stark contrast to the cluttered chaos of his own workspace. "So, the Phoenix Project," she began, getting straight to the point. "We need to accelerate the development of the core data processing module, its critical path." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "I've reviewed the initial assignments, and I want you to take the lead on this specific subcomponent, the real-time analytics engine. It requires careful handling of large datasets and robust error checking. I think this is a good opportunity for you to step up and demonstrate your capabilities." Lin Wei's mind went blank for a second, then flooded with panic. Lead? Him? On the critical part? This wasn't a reprimand. It was worse. It was a test he was certain he would fail. His past project setback, a relatively minor integration issue 2 years ago that he had magnified into a catastrophic personal failure in his memory, flashed before his eyes. He remembered the late nights, the mounting pressure, the feeling of disappointing everyone. "Me?" The words squeaked out, betraying his shock. Liu Juan raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Yes, you. Your technical skills in data handling are strong, Lin Wei. This requires that precision. Jiang Hao will handle the API integration, and you two will need to coordinate closely, of course. But the engine itself, the core logic, that's yours." She offered another brief smile, clearly expecting acceptance, not the terror swirling behind his eyes. "I have confidence you can manage it. Let me know if you foresee any immediate resource constraints." He managed a jerky nod, unable to form coherent words. "Confidence?" She must be mistaken. Or maybe this is some corporate strategy to expose my incompetence. The thought was bitter, unfair, yet stubbornly present. He mumbled something about needing to review the specs again and practically fled the office, the neutral phrase, "step up," echoing ominously in his ears. Back at his desk, the Python script seemed to writhe with renewed menace. He wasn't just stuck anymore, he was responsible. The weight of it felt crushing. The next 2 days were a blur of unproductive anxiety. Lin Wei opened the project files, stared at the requirements document, and felt his mind seize up. Instead of breaking down the task, he found himself lost in endless loops of what-ifs. What if the data volume overwhelmed his design? What if his error handling missed a crucial edge case? What if he couldn't make it performant enough? He'd start sketching an approach, then immediately second-guess it, imagining Liu Wan's critique or Jiang Hao's silent judgment. His procrastination took familiar forms. He'd spend 20 minutes meticulously reorganizing the icons on his desktop. He'd scroll through endless feeds on WeChat, vaguely searching for industry news but mostly absorbing snippets of others' seemingly successful lives. He'd get up to refill his water bottle 5 times in an hour, anything to avoid the terrifying blank canvas of the analytics engine. He saw Jiang Hao moving with purpose, occasionally having quick, efficient discussions with colleagues, his progress seemingly effortless. Lin Wei felt a pang of resentment mixed with grudging admiration. He probably just gets it. Some people are wired for this. He conveniently ignored the possibility that Jiang Hao might also face challenges, might also work hard, might also feel pressure. In Lin Wei's narrative, Jiang Hao was the effortless benchmark against which he inevitably fell short. The deadline felt like a physical presence, pressing down on him. His sleep suffered. He'd wake up at 3 a.m., his mind racing with potential failure scenarios. The modest Chengdu apartment felt suffocating, the city lights outside mocking his stagnation. On the 3rd day, desperate for a change of scenery and unable to face the office canteen, he slipped out for lunch, heading towards a small, bustling noodle shop tucked away in a side street near the office park. The aroma of chili oil, Sichuan peppercorns, and simmering broth hit him as he pushed through the door, a comforting assault on the senses. He found a small table in the corner and ordered a bowl of Dan Dan Mian. As he was slurping the spicy, numbing noodles, a familiar voice said, "Lin Wei, fancy seeing you here." He looked up, startled. It was Chen Hui from the Marketing Analytics Department. They weren't close friends, but occasionally shared coffee breaks or chatted at company events. She was a few years older, with a calm, observant demeanor that he found both intimidating and strangely soothing. "Chen Hui," he managed, wiping his mouth. "Hi." She smiled warmly, pulling out the chair opposite him. "Mind if I join you? Everywhere else is packed." "No, please." She ordered her own noodles and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the clatter of the shop filling the space. Then Chen Hui tilted her head slightly, studying him with a perceptive gaze. "Rough week, Lin Wei?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then sighed. "You could say that. Got assigned lead on a tricky part of the Phoenix project." "Ah, the big one. That's a significant responsibility. Sounds like an opportunity." Lin Wei flinched inwardly at the word opportunity. "More like a guaranteed public failure," he muttered, swirling the noodles in his bowl. Chen Hui didn't immediately offer platitudes. She simply watched him for a moment. "What story are you telling yourself about this situation, Wei?" He blinked, surprised by the question. "Story? It's not a story, it's reality. I'm not cut out for this level of responsibility. I'll mess it up, just like..." He trailed off, thinking of the old project. "Just like you messed up before?" She finished softly, without judgment. He must have mentioned it sometime. "And what's the objective evidence that you will mess this up, beyond that feeling?" He opened his mouth to argue, to list all his perceived shortcomings, but her calm, direct question stopped him. "Objective evidence?" There wasn't any, not really, just fear, just the memory of past discomfort amplified by his anxiety, just the comparison to an idealized version of Jiang Hao. "I don't know," he admitted, feeling a crack in his certainty. Chen Hui nodded slowly. "Fear tells compelling stories, Wei, very convincing ones, but they aren't always true. Sometimes," she added, stirring her noodles, "the only way to find out the real story is to start writing it yourself, one small step at a time. What's the very first, smallest step you could take on that engine?" Her words, simple and devoid of pressure, resonated in the noisy noodle shop. One small step. Not the whole terrifying mountain, just the first foothold. Back at his desk, the hum of the office felt slightly less oppressive. Chen Hui's question echoed in his mind. What's the very first, smallest step? He looked at the mountain of requirements. Leading the whole subcomponent still felt overwhelming, but maybe he could just tackle the input validation. That was concrete, manageable. He pulled up the relevant section of the specification document. He still felt the familiar knot of anxiety, the urge to check WeChat, the phantom presence of Lu Juan's critical gaze. But this time, he consciously pushed back. Okay, just focus on this one part. Input validation. What data types are expected? What are the constraints? What happens if the input is malformed? He forced himself to open a new file and start typing. Not elegant code, just comments outlining the logic. Check if input stream is not null. Verify data format matches expected schema. Define range checks for numerical values. It felt mechanical, almost childishly simple, but it was something. He worked for 30 minutes, then an hour, losing himself in the specific technical details. He actively resisted the urge to compare his progress to Jiang Hao's imagined speed. My task, my pace, he told himself, the phrase feeling awkward but necessary. When he finally looked up, he'd mapped out the entire validation sequence and even drafted some initial function skeletons. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was tangible progress, a small, unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest, a flicker of efficacy. He needed clarification on how upstream data errors should be logged. His first instinct was to guess, to avoid bothering Lu Juan, and potentially looking incompetent. He felt the old fear rise. What if it's a stupid question? She'll think I didn't read the docs properly. He literally typed out an email, then deleted it 3 times, agonizing over the wording. Then he remembered Chen Hui's other question. Objective evidence? Was there objective evidence Lu Juan would react negatively? No. Her feedback, while direct, was usually professional. He took a deep breath, opened the company's instant messaging tool, and typed a concise, specific question. Lu Juan, regarding Phoenix Data Engine logging, should upstream format errors trigger critical alerts or be logged as warnings for later analysis? Spec Section 4.2 is slightly ambiguous. He hit send before he could overthink it again. His heart pounded as he waited for the reply. A few minutes later, a notification popped up. Lu Juan, log as warnings for now, but flag for review. Good question, ensures consistency. Thanks. That was it. No criticism, no annoyance. Just a straightforward answer and appreciation. He read the good question part again. Relief washed over him, so potent it left him slightly lightheaded. It was such a small thing, but it felt disproportionately significant. He hadn't guessed. He hadn't hidden. He had asked, and the world hadn't ended. He had even, apparently, asked a good question. Energized by the small victory, Lin Wei dove back into the validation logic. He found a rhythm, the technical challenge itself starting to absorb his focus, pushing the anxious internal chatter slightly further away. He still had moments of doubt, but they didn't paralyze him as before. He started breaking the larger problem down into smaller testable units. Later that afternoon, while grabbing a coffee from the pantry, he overheard Jiang Hao talking on the phone, his voice tight with frustration. No, that deployment script failed again. Environment mismatch? Check the dependencies. I need this running by tomorrow. He saw Jiang Hao run a hand through his usually immaculate hair, a visible sign of stress. Lin Wei froze mid-paw. Jiang Hao? Stressed? Facing problems, failing deployments? It was a revelation. The image of the effortlessly successful colleague cracked slightly. Jiang Hao wasn't some coding god. He was another engineer dealing with complex systems and unexpected issues. He still seemed competent, obviously, but seeing that moment of human frustration subtly shifted Lin Wei's perception. The envy didn't vanish entirely, but it lost some of its bitter edge, replaced by a grudging understanding. Maybe it's not just me, he thought. Maybe everyone finds this hard sometimes. He tried to carry that perspective back to his desk. When he encountered a tricky algorithm optimization problem later, instead of immediately thinking, Jiang Hao would solve this in 10 minutes, he tried a different internal script. Okay, this is complex. When he encountered a tricky algorithm optimization problem later, instead of immediately thinking, Jiang Hao would solve this in 10 minutes, he tried a different internal script. Okay, this is the rogue. What approaches could work? Let's analyze the trade-offs. He consciously reframed the challenge from a measure of his inadequacy to simply a technical problem to be solved. The next day, Lu Wan scheduled a brief check-in meeting. Lin Wei felt the familiar anxiety spike, but reminded himself of the positive interaction over the logging question. He prepared concise notes on his progress and the specific areas where he was focusing. During the meeting, Liu Juan reviewed his initial structure for the validation module. "This looks well organized, Lin Wei," she commented, nodding. "However," she continued, pointing to a section, "this approach to handling concurrent data streams might become a bottleneck under heavy load. Have you considered using asynchronous processing here?" His first instinct was defensiveness. "She thinks my design is bad." His cheeks felt hot. He wanted to justify his choice, explain the complexities he'd already considered. But then he paused. He took a breath. "Okay, she's not attacking me, she's pointing out a potential issue." He looked at the diagram again, trying to see it from her perspective. "That's a valid point, Liu Wan," he said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I prioritized sequential consistency initially, but I see how concurrency could be an issue. Asynchronous processing would require managing state differently. Let me analyze the performance implications and rework that section. Thank you for pointing it out." Liu Duan simply nodded. "Good. Let me know your findings by end of day tomorrow." He left the meeting feeling okay. Not elated, but not crushed either. He'd received constructive criticism, and instead of letting it derail him, he'd engaged with it. He'd accepted it as technical feedback, not personal judgment. It felt like another small, significant shift. He recognized the old pattern, wanting to flare up, the self-blame, the feeling of inadequacy, but this time he hadn't let it consume him. He had data, he had a task, he could analyze and improve. The progress wasn't linear. There were still moments where Lin Wei felt overwhelmed, where the negative self-talk grew loud, where the comparison to Zhang Hao crept back in. But now he had tools, however rudimentary, to counter them. He started recognizing the patterns. There's the fear of judgment thought. Is it based on evidence? No. Okay, back to the code. Or, that's the dwelling on the past failure feeling. What did I actually learn from that situation? Right, double-check integration points. He found himself drawn to the idea of quiet reflection that Chen Hui sometimes mentioned. One evening, instead of going straight home to his apartment, he took a detour. He wandered through the historic streets near Wenshu Monastery, the scent of incense mingling with the spicy aroma of street food vendors grilling squid and tofu. He found a traditional tea house, tucked away down a quiet lane, its wooden lattice doors promising tranquility. Inside it was calm and dimly lit. Soft guzheng music played. He ordered a pot of fragrant jasmine tea and found a secluded table. The simple ritual of pouring the steaming tea into the tiny cup felt grounding. He pulled out a small notebook he'd started carrying. He didn't try to solve specific coding problems. Instead, he wrote down some of the recurring negative thoughts he'd noticed. I'm not smart enough for this. Zhang Hao is better. Liu Wan is disappointed. I'm going to fail. Looking at them written down, stripped of their immediate emotional power, they seemed less substantial. More like habits of thought than objective truths. He thought about Chen Hui's question again. What story are you telling yourself? He realized his story was one of inadequacy, constant comparison, and inevitable failure. It was a bleak narrative. What if I tried to tell a different story? Not one of guaranteed success, but one of effort, learning, and showing up despite the fear. A story about focusing on his own path, his own process. He wrote down the what if question from his earlier thoughts. What if not looking isn't about avoidance, but about seeing through? What was underneath the envy of Zhang Hao? A desire for recognition, yes, but also a fear that his own quiet diligence wasn't valuable. What was beneath the fear of Liu Wan's judgment? A deep-seated need for approval, perhaps linked to past experiences. He didn't have all the answers, but asking the questions felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. Understanding the roots, even dimly, seemed more powerful than just trying to swat the thoughts away. He sipped his tea, the delicate floral scent calming his nerves. He wasn't magically cured. The insecurities were still there, like background noise. But he felt a subtle shift in his relationship to them. He could observe them now, question them, instead of being completely swept away. He left the tea house feeling quieter inside, the frantic energy replaced by a tentative sense of clarity. In the final week leading up to the component delivery deadline, Lin Wei worked with a focus he hadn't experienced before. He still encountered technical challenges, a tricky memory leak, an unexpected interaction with another system module, but his approach was different. He tackled them methodically, researched solutions, and wasn't afraid to ask targeted questions when necessary, even collaborating briefly with Zhang Hao on an interface issue. The interaction with Zhang Hao was surprisingly normal. They discussed the technical points, exchanged ideas, and reached a solution. Zhang Hao seemed focused on the problem, not on judging Lin Wei. Lin Wei realized how much energy he had previously wasted projecting his own insecurities onto his colleague. Seeing him as just another engineer, albeit a skilled one, facing his own pressures, was liberating. He applied the insights from the tea house. When the familiar wave of anxiety washed over him before a code review, he acknowledged it. Okay, fear is here. He took a few slow breaths, reminded himself to focus on the technical substance, not imagined personal slights. He started treating feedback, both positive and negative, as data points for improvement, rather than verdicts on his self-worth. He finished the core logic of the analytics engine, including the revised asynchronous processing Liu Wan had suggested. He wrote unit tests, documented his code meticulously, and prepared a concise presentation summarizing his work, potential risks, and performance benchmarks. He felt a sense of ownership, a quiet pride in the effort and the learning that was separate from any external validation. The day of the presentation arrived. Lin Wei was scheduled to present his completed subcomponent to Liu Wan, Zhang Hao, and a couple of senior engineers from the architecture team. His stomach churned. The conference room felt cold, the large screen intimidating. He set up his laptop, his hands slightly trembling as he plugged in the cable. He saw Liu Wan take her seat, her expression neutral. Zhang Hao offered a brief nod as he sat down. The senior architects looked serious, expectant. The familiar script of imminent disaster started playing in his head. They'll find a fatal flaw. I'll stumble over my words. They'll realize they made a mistake giving me this responsibility. He took a deep breath, remembering the tea house, the feeling of quiet observation. Acknowledge the fear. It's just a feeling. Focus on the work. He began his presentation, his voice shaky at first, but gaining confidence as he delved into the technical details he now knew intimately. He walked them through the architecture, the data flow, the error handling, the performance optimizations. He finished the main part and opened the floor for questions. One of the senior architects, a stern-looking man named Mr. Fang, leaned forward. "Mr. Lin," he said, his tone sharp, "your approach to caching reference data seems potentially memory-intensive, especially under sustained peak load. Have you stress-tested this specific scenario? What's the memory footprint impact?" Lin Wei's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the fatal flaw. His old self wanted to shrink, to stammer apologies, to crumble under the scrutiny. He felt his face flush. He paused, took another conscious breath. Okay, it's a technical question, not an attack. He forced himself to meet Mr. Fang's gaze. "That's a very relevant point, Mr. Fang," he began, his voice surprisingly level. "We did run specific stress tests focusing on memory usage during peak load simulations." He brought up a slide showing performance metrics. "The current caching strategy does increase the baseline memory footprint, as you noted. However, it significantly improves query latency, which was a primary requirement. The tests indicate that even under projected maximum load, the memory usage stays within acceptable operational parameters for the allocated resources." He paused, then added, "We could explore a more aggressive cache eviction strategy if memory becomes a constraint in future scaling, but for the current requirements, this offered the best performance. Trade-off." He paused, then added, "We could explore a more aggressive cache eviction strategy if memory becomes a constraint in future scaling, but for the current requirements, this offered the best performance." He finished speaking, his pulse still racing, but he hadn't become defensive. He hadn't apologized unnecessarily. He had addressed the technical point directly, acknowledged the trade-off, and presented his data. He had stood by his work while remaining open. Fang considered his answer, nodding slowly. Acceptable trade-off for now, perhaps. Ensure that eviction strategy is documented as a future enhancement path." Liu Wan spoke next. The asynchronous processing seems well implemented, Lin Wei. Good recovery from the initial design. She then pointed out a minor area in the logging output that could be formatted more clearly for the operations team. Just a small refinement needed there. Lin Wei felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made him dizzy. He simply nodded. Understood. I can adjust the logging format easily. The meeting concluded a few minutes later. There was no round of applause, no effusive praise. Liu Juan gave him a brief, professional nod as people filed out. Solid work on a complex piece, Wei. Address Mr. Fang's documentation point and the logging format. Let's integrate it next week. Jiang Hao passed him on the way out. Nice handling of Fang's caching question, he said casually, almost as an afterthought, before disappearing down the corridor. Lin Wei stood alone in the quiet conference room for a moment, the hum of the projector, the only sound. He hadn't received a standing ovation. He hadn't suddenly been promoted, but he felt lighter. He had faced the pressure, navigated the criticism, and presented his work with a newfound composure rooted in the work itself, not in a desperate need for approval. He had managed his internal storm. That felt like the real victory. Later that day, walking home through the bustling Chengdu streets, the familiar sights and sounds seemed different. The aroma of mapo tofu from a small restaurant, the chatter of pedestrians, the flashing neon signs, they felt vibrant, part of the city's energy, rather than sources of overwhelming stimuli. He noticed the resilience in the faces of the street vendors, the easy laughter of friends sharing a meal. He passed Jiang Hao near the company entrance, heading out for the evening. On impulse, Lin Wei spoke up. Hey, Jiang Hao. Good job on getting that API integration sorted out. Heard it was tricky. Jiang Hao looked momentarily surprised, then smiled briefly. Thanks, Wei. Yeah, had a few late nights. Your engine module looks solid, by the way. Should integrate smoothly. It was a simple, professional exchange. No undercurrent of envy from Lin Wei. No perceived judgment. Just two colleagues acknowledging each other's work. It felt normal, healthy. He continued his walk, heading towards the Jin River that snaked through the city. He found a bench overlooking the water, watching the slow-moving boats drift by under the twilight sky. The air was soft, carrying the distant sounds of the city. He didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. The anxieties hadn't vanished forever. He knew they were part of his wiring, likely to surface again under pressure. But something fundamental had shifted. He had faced his internal antagonists, the envy, the fear, the negativity, not by trying to obliterate them, but by understanding them, questioning them, and choosing not to let them dictate his actions. He had learned to focus on his own effort, his own process, his own small steps. He had started, tentatively, to cultivate his own inner landscape, finding a measure of peace amidst the noise. Looking out at the shimmering lights reflected on the water, Lin Wei felt a quiet, realistic hope for the path ahead. The work wasn't finished, but he had begun. And for now, that was enough. He thought back to the original feelings of being stuck, the constant comparison, the weight of anticipated failure. It wasn't that the external pressures had vanished. Deadlines still existed. Expectations were still real. Colleagues like Jiang Hao would continue to achieve things. What had changed was his internal response to those pressures. He no longer felt like a passive victim tossed about by circumstance and his own runaway emotions. He had agency. He could choose his focus. He could question his automatic negative thoughts. The success wasn't about suddenly becoming fearless or brilliant overnight. It was about the accumulated weight of small, conscious